This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt Podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. Sorry about the lapse between episodes. I'm working crazy hours at my day job. We bought a house. And we had to go back to Wisconsin to move the rest of our stuff ourselves because movers have given us insane moving estimates. Elbow grease saves money, but boy is it exhausting. The good news is my focus is back on the show. And if you have case requests, feel free to drop me a line via social media. You're listening to episode 47. Randall Woodfield. Randall was born on December 26, 1950, in Salem, Oregon. He was the third-born child in the Woodfield family. The Woodfields were well-to-do, falling into an upper-middle-class category, and were well-respected in their Pacific Northwest community of Otter Rock. Randall's dad was an executive at Pacific Northwest Bell, and his mom stayed home with the kids. His dad pushed him to play sports, and he ran track, played basketball, and was a prominent player on the Newport High School football team. Their mother was a perfectionist, and her influence on their kids was clear. One of Randall's sisters was a lawyer, and the other a doctor. Even though he excelled at sports, Randall lived in the shadow of his successful older sisters. Problems began for Randy around age 11, when he started exposing himself to women. During his high school years, he flashed a group of teenage girls on a bridge in Newport, Oregon, and police actually arrested him. After the arrest for indecent exposure, the Woodfields sent him to therapy to address his anger and flashing issues. Unfortunately, therapy never altered his behavior. Since Randall was an important part of the football team, the coaches let his indecent behavior slide and buried the incident so he could continue to play. When he graduated high school, Randy's criminal record was expunged, and he went to a small community college called Treasure Valley in Ontario, Oregon. In 1970, he transferred to Portland State University, where he played wide receiver. At PSU, he really tried to bring religion into his life and joined a student group called Campus Crusade for Christ. Much like therapy, religion wasn't able to stop Randall from flashing women. During college, his behavior escalated. Besides exposing himself, he began committing burglaries. In 1970, Randall vandalized his ex-girlfriend's apartment, but was acquitted of that crime. 2 years later, in Vancouver, Washington, he was arrested and convicted for public indecency, and then arrested a year later for the same crime in Portland. Randy was a year and a half away from graduating with a bachelor's in physical education, but dropped out to pursue a career in the NFL. In 1974, the Green Bay Packers picked up Randall Woodfield as the 428th pick in the 17th round. He officially signed a one-year contract in February of that year and quit his job slinging food at the Burger Chef in Portland, Oregon. Randall's salary was $16,000 a year, along with financial incentives for catching passes. The Packers had expectations that their players maintain a high level of fitness, they had to keep a positive public image, and were not to associate with the criminal element. That summer, Randall scrimmaged against the Bears. The Packers then cut him during summer training camp, and he was without a job by August 1974. It amazed many people who knew Randy that he made the cut to be in the NFL in the first place. Some thought he was just an average player who actually did not like to be tackled and was tremendously allergic to physical contact. The Packers never gave an official statement about Randall Woodfield. At the time, they wanted an offense that ran the ball, so wide receivers were not a top priority. Truthfully, the Packers organization never ran a background check. Local police did make a statement about Woodfield and said that he was causing problems by exposing himself to women during his time in Green Bay. Randall moved to Oshkosh, Wisconsin to play semi-pro ball for the Manitowoc Chiefs, while he worked a regular job as a press brake operator for a company called Oshkosh Truck. The Manitowoc Chiefs let Randall go at the end of the season and never released a statement. The Chiefs football team disbanded a year later in 1976. Woodfield was never formally arrested while in Wisconsin, but the number of indecent exposure cases he was involved in reached double digits. A member of Wisconsin law enforcement had basically stated that Randall would not keep his thing in his pants. When asked to describe Randall Woodfield, his friends and teammates would have given mixed reviews. One coach said Randall was coachable, nice, polite, and quiet. Some said he was into his looks and was always grooming himself. Randall never had trouble getting girlfriends. Other teammates felt he was awkward and never really fit in. He was a loner and didn't have any friends. They never knew how to take some of the things he said. However, no one predicted what happened once Woodfield was done with sports. After his Wisconsin football career was put to rest, Randall moved back to Portland, and that's when everything truly went south. He started robbing women by knife or gunpoint, then would sexually assault or force women to perform oral sex on them. On March 5th, 1975, they caught Woodfield in a sting operation that involved a female undercover officer who was used as a decoy in a park. Woodfield tried to rob her at knife point. Police charged Randall with second-degree robbery, and he received 10 years in prison. He admitted some of his issues, the lack of impulse control, and quote-unquote sexual problems. Woodfield also owned up to taking steroids to help maintain his fitness. He never served the full sentence and was back on the street after 4 years. In 1979, they featured Woodfield in one issue of Playgirl magazine. He was 6 feet tall, had an athletic frame, and sported a porn stash. He wasn't chosen for the magazine and actually sent a picture of himself, and the magazine accepted it, not knowing anything about his criminal history. On October 11th, 1980, Sherry Ayer's body was discovered by her fiancé. What he didn't know was that 2 days prior, Sherry had been raped, bludgeoned, and stabbed in her downtown Portland apartment by her friend and childhood classmate Randall Woodfield. Sherry had known Woodfield since 2nd grade and had even written to him while he was in prison. They had reconnected at their high school class reunion. Sherry's family expected Woodfield had committed the crime and took his name to law enforcement. They asked Woodfield to take a polygraph test, but he refused. Law enforcement also felt he didn't answer any of the questions they asked him in a forthright or direct way. They felt he was responsible for the crime, but his blood type did not match the semen found on Sherry, so they weren't able to charge him with the crime. 22-year-old Darcy Fix had previously dated a friend of Woodfield's during college. She moved on and was dating 24-year-old Douglas Altig. On Thanksgiving, November 27, 1980, Woodfield showed up at Darcy's Portland residence unannounced. Darcy Fix and Douglas Altig were found bound and executed, shot with a .32 revolver. Darcy had owned a .32 caliber revolver, which was conveniently missing from her house. Law enforcement immediately drew connections to Randall Woodfield, but they didn't have any concrete evidence, therefore could not charge him with the crime. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Thank you to Best Fiends for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Contempt True Crime, even though I'm a little bit stuck and can't seem to break into the 600 levels. But hey, I've never been on that high of a level before with anything in my life, so don't worry, I'll keep at it. I like to sneak a few extra games in when I need to take a break, especially from watching too many true crime TikToks, which is like my new favorite thing. Best Fiends is endless fun with thousands of levels to play and countless cute characters to collect. It's a casual game that you play on your phone, and you don't even need to be tethered to Wi-Fi because you can play it without an internet connection, which is great for me because my internet provider sometimes drops the ball. The challenging levels will help you maintain your A game and will keep your noodle sharp. More importantly, I know you will enjoy this game, so download Best Fiends, free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. Now, back to the show. A few weeks later, Woodfield went on a spree of robberies, rapes, and murders. On December 9th, 1980, he slept on his fake beard, grabbed his gun, and held up a Vancouver, Washington gas station. Besides the fake beard, he would put a piece of athletic tape across his nose, like some competitive athletes wear, thinking it might confuse the victim and make him more difficult to identify. A few days later, on December 13th, he robbed an ice cream shop in Eugene, Oregon. The next day, it was a drive-in restaurant. On December 21st, he cornered a 25-year-old server in the restaurant's bathroom and used his gun to force her into touching him. 10 minutes after this assault, he went on to the next place, which was a Baskin-Robbins. He took money, but not before he assaulted more female victims. It was now January 1981, and law enforcement had solved none of these crimes. They dubbed the attacker the I-5 bandit, since most of these crimes took place in proximity to Interstate 5 in the Pacific Northwest. Woodfield was growing even bolder, to where he robbed the same gas station on January 8, 1981, that he robbed in December. He took all the money from the cash register and made the cashier expose herself. Woodfield robbed a food mart on January 11th. He actually fired his revolver and hit a 20-year-old female cashier named Susie Bennett on January 12th in Sutherland, Oregon. She survived the incident. 2 days later, he forced his way into a house and sexually assaulted 2 children. The pair of sisters were only ages 8 and 10. On January 18th, 20-year-old Sherry Hull and 20-year-old Beth Wilmot were cleaning the Transamerica office building and were finishing up their evening shift. Woodfield entered the building and sexually assaulted both women. When he was done, he shot Sherry and Beth. Sherry didn't make it, but Beth survived. There were 2 more robberies on the 26th and 29th of January, along with more sexual assaults. In February 1981, Woodfield called up his sister, who lived in Shasta County, California, and wanted to stop over for coffee. She told her brother that her husband didn't want him coming around their house. 37-year-old Donna Eckerd and her 14-year-old daughter were found deceased in a bed in their home, which was located just north of Redding, California, in Shasta County. The young girl had been raped, and they both were shot in the head. The young lady was sodomized after her death. In Redding, on the same day, an 18-year-old female cashier had been kidnapped and raped after a store she worked at was robbed. On February 4th, an Ashland, Oregon motel was held up that night. On the 9th, a fabric store was robbed, and a female customer and cashier were both sexually assaulted. 3 days later, similar crimes were committed in Vancouver, Olympia, and Bellevue, Washington. Randall Woodfield returned to Portland for Valentine's Day and had planned a party at the Marriott Hotel. He invited a bunch of people he had known in college, but no one showed up. Once he realized the party was a bust, he went to visit 18-year-old Julie Wrights. Woodfield met her when he was working as a bouncer for a bar called The Faucet in Portland. He stopped by her house in Beaverton, Oregon, around 2 a.m, and 2 hours later, the young woman had been raped and killed with a bullet to the head. When law enforcement examined the crime scene, they found a packet of instant coffee on the countertop and a kettle that had been left on with all the water boiled away. They determined the victim had a glass of wine with the perpetrator, and when she turned to make coffee, he attacked her. 2 weeks after Julie Wrights was found, law enforcement had all their attention on Randall Woodfield. There were too many coincidences and connections. Plus, there were 3 more crimes committed on the 18th, 21st, and 25th of February with at least 1 sexual assault. Detectives had been building a case against Woodfield, which was circumstantial at that point. They had a call log, which showed Woodfield had used a calling card and placed calls from payphones near the sites of the murders around the times they took place. A woman named Lisa Garcia was able to positively identify Woodfield from a photo lineup. Other victims identified him as well, including Beth Wilmot, who was sexually assaulted, shot, and left to die. On March 5, 1981, law enforcement brought Randall Woodfield into the Salem PD for questioning. Police got a warrant to search Woodfield's Springfield, Oregon apartment. They found an empty .32 shell casing inside of a duffel bag and a roll of athletic tape, which matched the tape found on some victims. On March 16, 1981, they charged Randall Woodfield with murder, rape, sodomy, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, and illegal possession of firearms. The trial started in summer 1981, and Woodfield went on trial for the murder of Sherry Hull and attempted murder of Beth Wilmot. Beth was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. She was a victim and a living witness to the crimes that Woodfield committed against her and her co-worker Sherry. The prosecutor, Chris Van Dyke, who was the son of actor Dick Van Dyke, said that Randall Woodfield was the coldest and most detached defendant he had ever dealt with. Many of the victims who survived being assaulted by Woodfield all felt that he had a cold, disconnected look in his eyes. It only took the jury 3.5 hours to find Woodfield guilty on every single count on June 26, 1981. They sentenced him to life in prison plus 90 years. A few months later, in October 1981, Woodfield had a second trial to face sodomy and weapons charges from another attack on a server in a Benton County, Oregon restaurant bathroom. Woodfield's defense attorney tried to get a petition to get the trial moved because the case was so well known in the community. The judge denied the request. The defense also wanted to hypnotize one of the state's witnesses, arguing that all the media attention heavily influenced them during this case. This was also denied. In this second trial, Randall Woodfield was easily convicted and had another 35 years tacked onto his never-ending prison sentence. The state of Oregon pursued no more convictions, even though there were so many other potential victims whose lives were affected by his crimes. They were content that Woodfield would die in prison, and they wouldn't have to continue to pay for additional trials since it would not change his outcome. Throughout his arrests, trials, and convictions, Woodfield never admitted to the murders, and the only thing he took ownership of was the robberies and the flashing. He claimed the murderer was a man named Larry Moore and said that the judge, DA, and lead detective were all corrupt. In March 1984, famous true crime author Ann Rule released a book about Randall Woodfield, which became a bestseller. She called it the I-5 Killer and detailed the crimes Woodfield committed as he cruised Interstate 5 in his gold VW Bug looking for victims in Washington, Oregon, and California. 3 years later, Woodfield filed a $12 million lawsuit against Ann Rule, claiming libel. A federal Oregon court dismissed the lawsuit in January 1988, since it had exceeded the statute of limitations. Some of Woodfield's letters he had written from prison were published by the Charles Press and were sold online. This time, Woodfield didn't file a lawsuit against the publisher. In October 1983, he was injured by another inmate in a prison fight. Other than this incident, the guards have reported that Woodfield keeps to himself. He sits on his bed and mostly ignores the guards and prisoners around him. Many guards report that Woodfield is still a fan of football, loves to talk about the sport, and enjoys reminiscing about his short-lived glory days on the football field. The female guards have a slightly different impression of him. They say that when Woodfield sees them, he works on his hair and he peacocks around his cell. Woodfield has been married 3 times and divorced twice during his penitentiary stay. In 2006, he created a MySpace account from prison and used it as a dating website. I'm Randy. I'm 55. I spend the remainder of my days in prison because I've committed a murder, along with many other crimes. I once tried out for the Green Bay Packers. The only reason I didn't make it was because of the skills I had to offer they didn't need at the time. This was probably the only time he ever admitted to committing murder. From the time of Woodfield's crimes in the 80s to the modern day, DNA forensics has come a long way. And in 2012, DNA testing proved that Randall Woodfield was linked to several murders. This includes Darcy Fix and Douglas Altig, who were found bound, gagged, and shot in the head in their Portland home. Donna Eckard and her daughter Janelle Jarvis, who were found murdered in their Shasta County, California home, and Julie Wrights, found murdered in her Beaverton, Oregon home. Randall Woodfield is suspected in 44 homicides and 60 rapes, and he's exactly where he needs to be, spending the rest of his days in Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem, Oregon. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, everyone.